Hey gang, so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about To Kill a Mockingbird, chapter 9. I feel like I was a little short-sighted when I said we were going to skim chapter 9, because then I looked back at the chapter and a lot happens and it's really, really dense. So we're going to talk a little bit about chapter 9. I'm also going to give you some pages that I really want you to read and study. And then on Thursday, you're going to have some guiding questions for chapter 9 and for chapter 10 that it's going to be important you do. So what I did on Canvas is I linked a summary from like the book expert or the course expert or whatever. It's 2 minutes or so. He does a fantastic job talking through chapter 9. So I'm going to give you key concepts that I really want you to mark in your book. And I'm going to have you make sure you watch that summary so that you feel like you get the overall gist of what's happening in chapter 9. And then when I'm back on Friday, we'll talk about the chapter in a little bit of depth to make sure that we understand what's going on, okay? Chapter 9 begins on page 99, so if you would turn there in your book, and it starts right away in the middle of the action. We've used the term in medias res before, and that's what happens here. Scout is in the middle of a fight with Cecil Jacobs because it says straight away on those pages that Cecil Jacobs announced in the schoolyard the day before that Scout Finch's daddy defended, and they used the N-word. And Scout's really confused because she feels like that word, she's heard it before, but she's not sure what it means in this context, and she's mad. So she goes at Cecil, and she says there, "What do you mean saying that?" I asked. "Nothing," Jim said. "Ask Atticus, and he'll tell you." So then she went home and she asked Atticus, "Do you defend N-word, Atticus?" I asked him that evening. "Of course I do. Don't say that, Scout. That's common." "It's what everybody says at school." "Well, from now on, it'll be everybody less one," Atticus says. "Well, if you don't want me to grow up talking like that, then why do you send me to school?" A little jab at the fact that she doesn't want to go to school in the first place, right? But basically, this is a conversation that the Finches are going to have, especially as Atticus is defending Tom Robinson in this upcoming trial. So he goes on page 100 to say that he is defending Tom, that Tom is a man that goes to Calpurnia's church, that he's a good man, and that the judge has asked him to defend Tom in this case. Okay? And Scout's like, "Well, if you don't, well, then why are you doing it, right? If you don't feel like you should, then why are you doing it?" And he says, it's not that he doesn't feel like he should, it's that other people feel like he shouldn't. And the main reason on 100 is if I didn't, I couldn't hold my head up in town. I couldn't represent this county in the legislature. I couldn't even tell you or Jim not to do something again. So you see where I highlighted that part right there? All right. And then on the very next page on 101, this is also important. You can kind of see the pages. "Simply by the nature of the work, every lawyer gets at least one case in his lifetime that affects him personally, and this one's mine, I guess." And then Atticus goes on to say, "You might hear some ugly talk about it at school, but do one thing for me if you will. You just hold your head high and keep those fists down. No matter what anybody says to you, don't let 'em get your goat. Try fighting with your head for a change. It's a good one, even if it does resist learning." And Scout asks the tough question. Do you see how right there I marked tough question? She says, "Atticus, are we going to win it?" She doesn't say you. She says we. And he says, "No, honey." And she says, "Then why?" And he says, and this is so important, so make sure you mark it. "Simply because we were licked 100 years before we started is no reason for us not to try to win," Atticus said. And in that statement is so much about institutional racism and slavery and Reconstruction and all of these things. But basically what Atticus is saying is just because our community doesn't think we're there yet doesn't mean we shouldn't try. Doesn't mean Tom shouldn't have a fair trial. So Atticus is going to give his best effort to make sure that this man gets the justice that he deserves. Okay? So then you keep going down 101 and 102. And the next day, when she went back to school and Cecil Jacobs taunts her again with a racial slur about her father, she puts her fists down and she's able to turn and walk away. Okay? So this little boy at school is taunting her and she's finally able to resist, right? But now's where it gets ugly on page 102. So for Christmas, They go to Finch's Landing, which is where Aunt Alexandra lives. And then her grandson, Francis, who's such a jerk, comes. And then Uncle Jack, who's Atticus's brother. So there's Atticus, Aunt Alexandra, and Jack. And they're all at Finch's Landing together for Christmas, including Jim, Scout, Francis, and Aunt Alexandra's husband. Okay? So on 103, it's just kind of explaining and describing who the people are. Same thing on 104, a little bit of small talk. And Jack gets a little frustrated because Scout's been swearing. And then Atticus is like, don't worry about it. She's just trying to get attention, right? And so then you can keep going on 105. And Uncle Jack and Atticus just sort of talk about what it means to raise kids and how hard that can be, right? And then on 106, it really describes all of Finch's Landing and what Finch's Landing is. And it's a very pretty homestead that belongs to the family, obviously. All right. So then you keep going and you keep going on 107. And then we get Francis. And Francis is just kind of a little twerp, right? On the bottom of 107 is one of my favorite descriptions in the book. Scout says, talking to Francis gave me the sensation of settling slowly to the bottom of the ocean. He was the most boring child I ever met. As he lived in Mobile, he could not inform me to the school authorities, but he managed to tell everything he knew to Aunt Alexandra, who in turn unburdened herself to Atticus, who either forgot about it or gave me hell, whichever struck his fancy. But the only time I ever heard Atticus speak sharply to anyone was once when I heard him say, "Sister, I do the best I can with them." It had something to do with my going around in overalls. So then on 108, look at all this stuff. And then I marked, this is all Aunt Alexandra. And she's frustrated because Scout is not ladylike enough. And Aunt Alexandra wants her to wear dresses and be more ladylike and be a ray of sunshine for her father, blah, blah, blah. So read that description a little bit just so you can understand. And remember what we did with our stations about what it means to be proper and what it means to be a lady in the South. And Aunt Alexandra is trying to get Atticus to raise Scout that way. So then if you go down, they're having Christmas dinner, and they're having Christmas dinner, and they're having Christmas dinner. And then they were talking a little bit about dill, and basically Francis says that dill is trash. Okay? So then on 110, everything gets a little hot. On 110, Francis, that's not so. And Francis grinned at me. You're mighty dumb sometimes, Jean Louise. Guess you don't know any better, though. And Scout says, what do you mean? And Francis says, if Uncle Atticus lets you run around with stray dogs, Dill, that's his own business, like Grandma says, so it ain't your fault. I guess it ain't your fault either if Uncle Atticus is a lover besides, but I'm here to tell you it certainly does mortify the rest of the family. And Scout goes, Francis, what the hell do you mean? And he says just what I said. Grandma said it's bad enough that he lets y'all run wild, but now he's turned out a lover and will never be able to walk the streets and make him again. He's ruining the family, that's what he's doing. So Francis at this point also knows that he's getting Scout like riled up, right? So he says it again, and he says it again, and he says it again. And then Jean Louise kind of pounces on him. Scout pounces on him. And unfortunately what happens is when you keep going on 112, Francis looked at me carefully, concluded that I had been sufficiently subdued, and crooned softly, lover. This time I split my knuckle to the bone on his front tooth. My left impaired, I assailed him with my right, but not for long. Uncle Jack pinned my arms to my sides and said, stand still. So then Uncle Jack is mad at Scout. And the problem is he doesn't listen to her. And he doesn't listen about what actually happened and why it happened. And she says that she will, well, Scout says later on down that page, I'll never speak to you again as long as I live. I hate and despise you and hope you die tomorrow. All right, so then on 113, Uncle Jack's like, you know, you're not fair. I love you even after what you did, etc., etc. And Uncle Jack's like, you know what, Jean Louise, I don't get kids. right? And then she's like, yeah, and surely you don't. And when she tells Uncle Jack what actually happened, he's like, well, I'm going to go tell your dad. I'm at least going to tell Aunt Alexandra. And she's like, no, 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 no. I promised my dad I wouldn't get in a fight. I wouldn't lose my head over this. I was going to be good. And if he finds out what I did, he's going to be really mad at me. So Uncle Jack promises, and he doesn't tell Atticus why Scout got in a fight. So on 115, there's something really important that happens right here. You see this? Okay. I know your daughter gave me my first lessons this afternoon, says Jack. She said I didn't understand children much and told me why. She was quite right, Atticus. She told me how I should have treated her. I'm so sorry I romped on her. And Atticus chuckled. She earned it. So don't feel too remorseful. Right? And then turn the page. And then he says, children are children, but they can spot an invasion quicker than adults, and evasion simply muddles them. No, you had the right this afternoon, but the wrong reasons. Bad language is a stage all kids go through. And then a little bit further down, Scout's got to learn to keep her head and learn soon with what's in store for these next few months. She's coming along, though. Jim's getting older, and she follows his example a good bit now. All she needs is some assistance sometimes. So Atticus is really worried about the trial and how it's going to impact the kids and what's coming. Right? And then you go over to 117. Well, bottom of 116, 117. And it's the first time we start to hear about the trial and what's happened. It could be worse, Jack. The only thing we've got is a black man's word against the Yules. The evidence boils down to you did and I didn't. And the jury isn't possibly expected to take Tom Robinson's word against the Yules. Are you acquainted with the Yules? And then he kind of explains like who the Yules are and how they're nasty and dirty and just very undesirable people in the community. And then Atticus says, I kind of hoped I'd get through without a case like this, but the judge said, here we go. And Atticus says, this is really important characterization of Atticus. But right, but do you think I could face my children otherwise? You know what's going to happen as well as I do, Jack, and I hope and pray I can get Jim and Scout through it without bitterness and most of all, without catching, right here, Makeham's usual disease. Why reasonable people go stark grave and mad when anything involving a Negro comes up is something I don't pretend to understand. I just hope that Jim and Scout come to me for their answers instead of listening to the town. I hope they trust me enough. Jean Louise? So Atticus knew what he was saying to Jack, that Scout was listening the whole time. So maybe that message was a little less about Uncle Jack and a little more about Scout and Jim. So I scurried to my room, and went to bed. Uncle Jack was a prince of a fellow not to let me down. But I never figured out how Atticus knew I was listening. And it was not until many years later that I realized he wanted me to hear every word he said. So guys, 9 is a really, really important chapter because for the first time, we hear lots of the racist language that would have been present in Maycomb. And we hear it directed at Atticus, and we hear it directed at the children. And we hear it coming from 2 places, which is also equally important. We hear it coming from outside of the family, from the community and Cecil Jacobs at school. But then maybe even worse and more hurtful, we hear it coming from Francis, inside of their family and inside of, what should be their circle of trust and love and respect, and it is not. And so in both directions, the children and Atticus are going to face a lot of criticism. And that's foreshadowing what's going to be coming later on in part 2 of the book, okay? I promise we'll talk more about this chapter when I see you on Friday. And then you'll also do some revision or review questions on chapters 9 and 10, okay? All right, be awesome tomorrow, or be awesome today, be awesome tomorrow, and then I'll check in with you guys on Friday, okay? Thanks, bye.